It was just another sunny afternoon when two teenage boys walked into one of the most luxurious car dealerships in town. Dressed in plain white t-shirts, cargo shorts, and sneakers, they didn't exactly look like the usual clients who stroll through a showroom filled with million-dollar cars, but their eyes sparkled with curiosity, excitement, and something else. Confidence. They moved slowly between the sleek black supercars, quietly admiring the craftsmanship and design, totally unaware that their presence was already causing a stir among the staff and other customers. The atmosphere began to shift. A few people standing near the reception started whispering and casting glances their way. The manager, a sharply dressed man in a tailored suit, raised an eyebrow as he watched the boys approach the latest Rolls-Royce model on display. They weren't touching anything. They weren't making noise, but still their presence seemed to bother everyone. It didn't take long before the manager walked up to them, not with a smile, but with a frown painted on his face. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but cold. The boys looked at each other, slightly confused. "Just looking," one of them said with a grin. "These are some beautiful cars." The manager's expression didn't change. "This dealership isn't open for sightseeing," he said flatly. "Unless you're here with a parent or planning to buy, I'll have to ask you to leave." For a moment, the boys just stood there, speechless, embarrassed, but mostly surprised. They hadn't expected to be judged so quickly, and kicked out even quicker. Without making a scene, they quietly turned around and walked out of the showroom. Heads turned as they left, some customers even smirking, as if to say, they didn't belong here anyway. The sliding glass doors closed behind them, and just like that, they were gone. But what nobody knew was that this was just the beginning of a story they'd never forget. Because the next day, everything changed. Just before noon, when the sun was hitting the glossy showroom windows and the usual crowd of suited clients started arriving, the roar of an engine echoed down the street. Heads turned. Employees rushed to the front windows, and then they saw it. A brand new, custom black Rolls-Royce slowly pulled up to the front entrance. People stepped aside as the car came to a stop, gleaming under the sun, its signature hood ornament sparkling like a crown. Before anyone could even react, a second Rolls-Royce pulled in right behind it. Same luxury, same unmistakable presence, but in a deep midnight blue. Two identical symbols of power, wealth, and status parked side by side, like royalty arriving for an unannounced visit. The doors opened slowly, and out stepped the two teenage boys from the day before. But this time, they weren't alone. From the black Rolls-Royce emerged a tall, commanding figure in an elegant tailored suit. He didn't say a word as he walked forward, his presence impossible to ignore. The manager's face turned pale the moment he recognized who it was. A billionaire. Not just any wealthy man, but one of the most influential figures in the business world, a name that echoed in boardrooms and financial headlines. He walked straight up to the manager, his son standing calmly at his sides. There was a tense silence. No one knew what was about to happen. The same kids who were told to leave just 24 hours earlier were now back, with their father, and with the kind of entrance that money can't buy. Not just to look around this time. No, this visit had a purpose, a message. And just like that, the whole dealership was holding its breath. What would the father say? Was he here to buy a car, or to make a point? Would there be consequences for the way his sons were treated? Or was this just a lesson unfolding right in front of everyone's eyes? This wasn't just about expensive cars or teenage curiosity anymore. It had become a story about assumptions, respect, and the power of humility. A story that reminds us why appearances can be deceiving, and why you should never judge someone by what they wear or how old they are. Because you never really know who's walking through those doors. And just when you think the story's over, it's only just begun. The billionaire didn't say anything right away. He just looked around the dealership slowly, taking in the faces of the employees, most of whom had watched his sons get turned away the day before. The room was so quiet, you could hear the subtle ticking of the showroom clock and the soft hum of the luxury cars. No one dared to speak. The boys stood calmly next to him, looking straight ahead, their expressions unreadable. But behind their eyes, there was a quiet sense of justice, like they knew this moment was about to shift everything. The manager stepped forward, clearly trying to collect himself. His voice trembled just slightly. "Sir, welcome. We didn't know." The man raised his hand gently, cutting him off. Still no words, just that sharp, commanding presence that told everyone in the room he didn't need to explain himself. The staff, who had looked so sure of themselves yesterday, now stood with nervous smiles, unsure of what to do. Phones were tucked away, hands clasped. It was as if the entire atmosphere of the showroom had changed in an instant. What no one in that dealership realized was that this man wasn't just wealthy. He was someone who built his empire from nothing. He knew what it felt like to be underestimated. He'd once been a teenage boy just like his sons, curious and full of ambition, judged for the way he looked or where he came from. That's why this moment wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. The boys had told him everything the night before. They hadn't even seemed angry, just disappointed. One of them had shrugged and said, "Maybe we just didn't look like we belonged." That hit him hard, because if his own sons were being treated that way, with all the resources and values he had raised them with, how many other kids were being dismissed and judged every day? The story was bigger than a car dealership. It was about respect, about character, and about how some people only see value when it's attached to money or appearance. But the billionaire hadn't come here to yell or make a scene. That wasn't his style. He came to make a statement, one that no one in that building would forget. He walked past the stunned manager and moved toward one of the Royces with the calm confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything. A quiet conversation followed, just loud enough for a few staff members to hear. Then he turned and nodded toward his sons. And still the questions hung in the air. Was he about to buy a car? Was he about to buy all the cars? Or was this something else entirely? And why had he brought two Rolls-Royces instead of one? The staff shifted uncomfortably. Some tried to act busy, others just stared. The tension hadn't lifted. It had only grown deeper. Because now, it wasn't just about what had already happened. It was about what was coming next. The billionaire circled the car with his sons quietly, occasionally glancing at the dealership staff, most of whom were trying their best not to make eye contact. The manager, now clearly regretting his actions from the day before, stood stiffly, unsure if he should apologize, speak, or simply wait for whatever was coming next. A few employees whispered nervously among themselves, recalling the moment when the two boys had been turned away. Some admitted they'd laughed. Others had said nothing, but said nothing wasn't much better. Inside the dealership, the energy was completely different now. The luxury showroom that once felt like a playground for the wealthy now felt like a courtroom. The billionaire didn't need to raise his voice. Just being there, with those two Rolls-Royces and the calm look on his face, said everything. He wasn't just there as a customer. He was there as a father. In the corner of the room stood a young salesman named Daniel. He remembered seeing the boys walk in the day before, and he had actually wanted to go over and help them, maybe ask if they had questions, but the manager had stepped in so fast and shut the whole thing down. Daniel wasn't new to the business, but he was still figuring out how things worked in this world of polished shoes and perfect smiles. Now, as he watched the scene unfolding, he couldn't help but wonder if this would be a turning point, not just for the dealership, but for how people like him handled situations like this in the future. Meanwhile, out on the floor, the billionaire finally turned and locked eyes with the manager. There was no anger in his voice when he spoke, just disappointment. "You didn't ask their names. You didn't ask who they were. You looked at them and decided they didn't belong here. The manager opened his mouth to respond, but the billionaire held up a hand again. Not every lesson has to be loud, he said, almost to himself. Sometimes silence teaches more than shouting ever could. That's when one of the boys stepped forward. We weren't trying to cause any trouble, he said quietly. We just love cars. We've been following brands like Rolls-Royce, Ferrari, McLaren, since we were kids. We wanted to see them up close. There was a pause. You could feel everyone in the room realizing what had really happened. Two kids with genuine passion had been dismissed because they didn't look the part, because they weren't in suits, because they were young. And now, standing next to a father with more wealth and power than anyone else in that room, they didn't need to say anything else. Their presence was enough. But the tension didn't stop there. Back in the dealership offices, the regional director had just gotten wind of what was happening. A call had come in from one of the employees, worried that this situation was about to spiral into a PR nightmare. The director knew the billionaire by name. Everyone in the industry did. And his reputation wasn't just about his money. It was about how he handled himself. Calm, strategic, but brutally honest when it mattered. Now decisions had to be made. Fast. Should they issue a formal apology? Would it even be enough? Should they offer him some kind of deal or gesture? Or was the damage already done? Outside, a couple of customers who had been browsing now stood glued to the windows, watching everything unfold. One of them, a father himself, leaned over to his son and whispered, "That's what integrity looks like." The son nodded, wide-eyed, having just witnessed something he wouldn't forget. And the employees? Some of them started reflecting on their own assumptions. They realized they might have done the same thing if they were in the manager's shoes. That thought alone made a few of them uncomfortable, because this moment had become more than just a rich man defending his kids. It had turned into a mirror, showing everyone who they were and who they could be. Yet still the question lingered. What now? Was the billionaire here to buy a car after all? Was he going to walk away and take his business and his influence somewhere else? Or was he planning something that no one could see coming? The boys remained quiet, watching their father. They'd seen him in boardrooms, on stages, on the covers of magazines. But right now, they were seeing something else. A man who didn't need to shout to be heard. A man who was standing up not just for them, but for every kid who had ever been told they didn't belong. And just like that, the story was still unfolding. And nobody in that showroom could predict how it was going to end. The billionaire circled the car with his sons quietly, occasionally glancing at the dealership staff, most of whom were trying their best not to make eye contact. The manager, now clearly regretting his actions from the day before, stood stiffly, unsure if he should apologize, speak, or simply wait for whatever was coming next. A few employees whispered nervously among themselves, recalling the moment when the two boys had been turned away. Some admitted they'd laughed. Others had said nothing, but said nothing wasn't much better. Inside the dealership, the energy was The billionaire slowly walked back to the front of the dealership, his footsteps echoing across the polished floor. Every eye followed him. His two sons stayed close behind, heads high but expressions serious. This wasn't just another rich family flexing their power. It was something deeper. There was a message here, and everyone could feel it getting closer to the surface. Outside, both Rolls-Royces remained parked like silent giants. Their presence alone had drawn attention from people passing by on the street. A few onlookers had started filming from a distance, unsure of what exactly was happening, but certain it was something worth capturing. Luxury cars, a famous figure, and a crowd frozen in silence. It looked like the beginning of a headline. But inside, no one was thinking about cameras. They were thinking about what this moment meant, especially the staff who had watched it all unfold from the beginning. Daniel, the young salesman, shifted uneasily. His heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't stop replaying the moment. The manager had dismissed the boys yesterday. He'd wanted to step in, but he hadn't. Now, standing in this storm of tension, he wished he had. He didn't know what the billionaire was going to do next, but he knew that whatever happened would probably change the way this dealership operated forever. The manager wiped his forehead, trying to keep his cool. He had built a reputation for being sharp, fast, and in control. But right now, nothing about him looked in control. He wanted to say something, anything, but the weight of his earlier decision was suffocating him. He made a call based on how 2 kids looked. Now those same kids were standing in front of him with a man who could buy out the entire dealership without even thinking twice. Then came the voice, low, calm, and firm. "Let me ask you something," the billionaire said, addressing the room. "How many people walk through these doors every day who don't look like they're ready to buy a car? And how many of them walk out feeling like they were never supposed to be here in the first place?" No one answered. The question wasn't just for the manager. It was for everyone. He stepped closer to one of the cars on the showroom floor. It was a black McLaren, polished to perfection. He studied it for a moment, then turned toward the group of employees standing near the desk. "Luxury means more than price tags," he continued. "It means experience. It means dignity. And the moment you take that away from someone based on your assumptions, you lose something money can't buy: respect." The room remained frozen. Some employees lowered their eyes. Others exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing something rare. This wasn't about buying a car anymore. It was about the values behind the brand. At that moment, a woman in a dark blazer, clearly someone from corporate, hurried into the dealership. She'd been briefed about what was happening and had rushed over to try and handle the situation before it escalated. Her face was composed, but there was panic behind her smile. She approached the billionaire cautiously. "Mister," she started, trying to sound composed, "I want to personally apologize for what happened yesterday. That experience does not reflect our brand or our values." He looked at her, patient but unreadable. "Are you apologizing," he asked slowly, "because you mean it? Or because you're worried this will go viral?" The question hit harder than anyone expected. There was no accusation in his voice, but it cut through the air like a blade. The woman hesitated, just long enough for the silence to grow uncomfortable. One of the boys gently touched his father's sleeve. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes said enough. Let's go. Maybe they didn't need to say or do anything else. Maybe their point had already been made. But the billionaire wasn't done yet. He looked back at the McLaren, then at the 2 Royces outside. Then, without warning, he stepped toward the front desk. "I want to place an order," he said. The billionaire stood there, hand resting on the edge of the front desk, the tension in the room thick enough to cut. His words had landed like thunder, and yet there was still a pause, a heavy silence hanging between what he had just said and what he was about to do next. Everyone in the dealership was frozen in place. The manager had gone pale. The corporate rep looked like she was calculating damage control in real time. The billionaire's sons, still calm and composed, waited, used to moments like this, but never quite this personal. Then, just when it felt like he would turn and walk out for good, the glass doors slid open again. A second man walked in, sharp suit, clean cut, about the same age as the billionaire. People in the room turned toward him instinctively, not because they knew who he was, but because something about the way he carried himself demanded attention. He walked straight over to the billionaire and extended his hand with a slight smirk. "You always know how to make an entrance," he said. The billionaire shook his hand. "You said you were in town. Thought you might like to see this for yourself." Now the employees were confused. Some whispered to each other. Who was this new guy? Another businessman? Another billionaire? Then the second man turned to the staff and said, "I'm the silent partner who helped finance this dealership. I've kept a low profile for years, but today seemed like a good day to speak up." Gasps echoed through the room. Now it wasn't just about one angry customer. The man who had helped fund the very building they were standing in was now part of the conversation. The manager looked like he was about to collapse. "Wait," he stammered. "You're him asterisk." The second man nodded, still calm. "And these," he said, nodding toward the two boys, "these are the kind of customers I want walking through those doors. The future. The next generation. Not just people who can afford to buy, but people who love what they're buying, who respect it, who study it, who show up not just to spend money, but to dream." The message wasn't just about cars anymore. It was about culture, about who gets included, and who gets shut out before they even get the chance. The regional director, now panicked, pulled out her phone and whispered to someone on the other end. It was clear this wasn't just a tense moment. This was a brand crisis. The wrong headline, the wrong clip, and this whole thing could go viral for all the wrong reasons. But the billionaire wasn't raising his voice. Neither was his business partner. That was the scariest part. They were calm, composed, dead serious. "Do you know what bothers me the most?" the billionaire said finally. "It's not that you've judged my sons. It's that you didn't even think twice about it. Like it was just business as usual." The second man nodded in agreement. "That's the real problem. This isn't just one mistake. This is a pattern. How many times has this happened here before?" More silence. A young intern, barely out of college, standing near the back of the room, suddenly spoke up. "Honestly, I've seen it happen more than once," she said quietly. Her voice trembled. "Not just with kids, but anyone who didn't look rich. We're told to focus on serious buyers." The words hit hard. The manager's jaw clenched, trying to hold back a reaction, but it was too late. The truth was spilling out, and now the people inside the dealership were looking not just at the billionaire, but at themselves. Then came the second twist. The business partner turned back to the billionaire and said, "Tell them what you told me this morning." The billionaire hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I was planning to invest in a new dealership," he said. "A modern one. Different from this. One that welcomes curiosity, not just cash. One that trains its staff to look past the surface. I was ready to announce it in a few weeks." The employees leaned in. Even the corporate rep looked stunned. "But after yesterday, I made a few calls. That new dealership, it's already locked in, and it's opening right down the street." It was like dropping a bomb in the middle of the showroom. A few employees looked panicked. Some stepped back, as if trying to disappear. The manager's expression crumbled into disbelief. He realized in that moment that his worst fear wasn't losing a sale. It was watching someone build a better version of his business right in front of him, and knowing he wouldn't be a part of it. The billionaire's voice remained even. "And I'm going to be hiring. From the ground up." He looked directly at Daniel. "You still want to be part of something real?" Daniel nodded before his brain even caught up. And just like that, the tone shifted again, not to relief, but to pressure. Because now there was a new player in town. One who had more money, more values, and something even more powerful, a reason. A story. The room was still spinning with tension as the weight of the billionaire's words hung in the air. Every employee in the dealership stood rooted to the floor, eyes darting between the billionaire, his sons, and the man who had just revealed himself as the silent partner. It felt like a turning point, like the story had reached its peak. But the moment hadn't passed yet. Something was still coming. The manager finally stepped forward. For the first time, he looked less like the man who ran the place and more like someone caught in the middle of a storm with no place to hide. He took a shaky breath. I made a mistake," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have judged your sons, or anyone. I've been in this business for a long time, and somewhere along the way, I forgot that people matter more than perception." The billionaire watched him without blinking. His expression was unreadable, but his sons seemed to soften slightly, just enough to suggest they appreciated the attempt at honesty. Still, an apology alone couldn't undo what had happened. Not when it had already echoed across a room full of witnesses and changed how people saw this place. The silent partner spoke up next. This dealership was supposed to represent excellence, but excellence doesn't just come from luxury cars and glossy floors. It comes from how you treat people, every single person. Then, without warning, the billionaire reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slim leather folder. He handed it to Daniel. Inside was an official offer letter. Contract, salary, signing bonus, the works. Daniel looked at it stunned. He couldn't even speak. "I watched how you reacted yesterday," the billionaire said. "You didn't say anything then, but I could see it in your eyes. You knew something wasn't right. I want people like you on my team, people who care." Daniel nodded, overwhelmed. It wasn't just a new job. It was a new life. The corporate representative stepped forward again, trying one last time to hold the pieces together. "We take full responsibility," she said. "We'll review training. We'll update our policies. We'll—" The billionaire cut her off with a polite shake of his head. "It's too late for all that. You had a chance to lead, and you followed instead." Then came the final blow, the moment no one had seen coming. The billionaire turned to his sons and said, "You two still want that car?" They glanced at each other, smiling for the first time since the whole ordeal began. "Yeah," the older one said. "We do." He nodded, then turned toward the silent partner. "Then let's go." Everyone assumed they were heading outside, to one of the Royces, maybe to go visit the new dealership site, or to celebrate somewhere far from here. But instead, the billionaire walked over to the far end of the showroom, where a sleek, limited edition hypercar had been roped off behind velvet cords. A car no one had touched since it arrived. A seven-figure machine that was brought in more for display than for sale. The billionaire unhooked the rope and motioned to the salesman nearby. "I'll take it," he said. "But not for me, for them." The showroom fell silent again. "You're buying that asterisk car for your sons?" the manager asked, stunned. The billionaire turned and looked him square in the eye. "No, I'm buying it from them asterisk." Now the confusion deepened. He stepped closer to his boys and pulled out another folder, this time filled with legal documents, brand agreements, and startup capital details. "I transferred the ownership of our new dealership into their names this morning. They're no longer just my sons. They're now the youngest co-owners of a luxury automotive brand in the state." Shock rippled through the room. The billionaire looked at the manager one last time. "You didn't just turn away two kids yesterday. You turned away your future employer." And just like that, the twist hit like a lightning bolt. Everything everyone thought they knew about the power dynamic in the room had just flipped on its head. The boys weren't just the billionaire's sons anymore. They were business owners, decision makers, industry players in their own right. The two teens walked over to the desk with quiet confidence, the same spot they had stood the day before when they were told to leave. One of them turned to Daniel and smiled. "Think we'll be seeing you soon." Daniel smiled back. "I hope so." As the family left the dealership for the last time, both Royces still gleamed under the sunlight outside. But this time, they weren't symbols of wealth. They were symbols of something bigger, growth, justice, and a future that looked very different from the past. Inside, the dealership staff stood in silence, not sure whether they had just watched an ending or the beginning of something completely new. Either way, one thing was clear. They'd never look at a teenage kid walking through their doors the same way again. The sun had started to dip lower in the sky, casting long golden streaks across the dealership floor. The Royces pulled away smoothly, leaving behind silence and a whole lot of reflection. Inside, everyone stood still for a while, unsure of what to say. The atmosphere felt like the end of a chapter no one had seen coming, a lesson learned in the most unexpected way. Daniel looked down at the offer letter still in his hand. It didn't feel real. Just yesterday, he was questioning his place in this job, wondering if he had made a mistake choosing this path. But now, someone had seen something in him. Not just any someone, but a man who could have hired anyone anywhere. And he chose him. That meant something. It reminded Daniel that paying attention to people, treating them with respect, and listening to your gut still mattered, even in the high-speed world of luxury sales. The manager stepped back from the group, avoiding eye contact. He'd been in the industry long enough to know what a public lesson looked like. And this one would follow him. He had built his reputation on speed, instinct, and assumptions. But that instinct had failed him in a big way. Watching those two boys walk out, not as customers but as owners, had shaken into his core. He thought back to all the people he might have dismissed over the years, the quiet ones, the ones who didn't dress the part, the ones who walked away without saying a word. What if he had missed out on more moments like this? People don't forget how they're treated. And now he wouldn't either. The corporate representative, still gripping her phone, finally spoke into it. Yes, we'll begin drafting a statement. No, we can't spin this. We need to it. Her tone had changed. Not defensive, but sincere. She had seen enough to realize that public image wasn't about controlling a story. It was about earning *1. And this story, however messy, might just save their company from making the same mistake again. They'd have to rethink hiring, retrain staff, and more importantly, rebuild trust. Outside the dealership, the two teens rode quietly in the back of one of the Royces. The younger brother stared out the window, eyes thoughtful. "Do you think they got it?" he asked. His older brother smiled a little. Some did. Some will need time. They both knew their journey wasn't over. Owning a business wasn't just about making money. It was about leading, about showing people what real change looks like. They weren't going to run their dealership like the one they'd just left. They were going to create something better, something that welcomed people, no matter how they looked when they walked through the door. Back at the dealership, a few employees began to talk quietly among themselves. One of them said, "That was probably the wildest thing I've ever seen." Another replied, "Yeah, but maybe it's exactly what we needed." A third chimed in, "Makes you think, right? How many chances do we miss because we're too busy judging?" And that was the thing. This story wasn't just about two teenagers getting rejected and turning the tables. It was about everyone. Every person who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside. It was about how one small act of disrespect could carry a ripple far greater than anyone expected. But it was also about how people could grow, how businesses could evolve, and how even the most uncomfortable moments could lead to something bigger. Days later, news about the incident quietly made its way online, not because the Billionaire had posted anything, but because a customer who had been in the store that day had uploaded a short video with a caption that simply read, "This is how you lead with class." The clip didn't show the Royces or the Billionaire's name. It just captured the moment he told the staff, "You didn't just turn away two kids yesterday. You turned away your future employer." The video went viral. People shared it with comments like, "Never judge a book by its cover," and "This needs to be shown in every business training session." It wasn't about the luxury. It was about the message. And that message found its way into conversations all over the internet, from car lovers to young entrepreneurs to people who had always been told they didn't look successful enough. Meanwhile, construction on the new dealership began faster than expected. The Billionaire's sons were there almost every day, meeting with architects, designers, and future staff. They weren't just learning the business, they were shaping it from the ground up. And Daniel? He left his old job and joined the new venture, stepping into a role that finally made him feel seen. The original dealership, it didn't shut down, but it did change. The manager eventually stepped down, replaced by someone younger, more open-minded. The company introduced a program for inclusive hiring and customer service training,